Hello and welcome to Mel Make Stuff. My name is Melissa, and in today's video I am going to show you all of the projects that I was able to finish over a 3-month period earlier this year. One of the first videos I put out this year was a recap of all of my current projects, so this video might make a little more sense if you have seen that video already, so I will link that in the description below. Now let's go back in time and I'll show you some of my projects, what I've been working on. The first thing I decided to pick up and try to finish is this cross-stitch project that I have been working on for years and years. You can see at this point I pretty much just needed to finish these floral borders and put the last finishing touches on, and then that was actually finished this month. There's really no reason it should have taken me this long to finish this project, and the reason it took years is because I kept putting it down and not working on it for sometimes months and years at a time. And I'm very glad to have this done because I still think it's hilarious. I thought it was hilarious when I bought the pattern, and glad to have this one finished. After that was done, I decided to pick up my Fassett needlepoint project. This was my first ever needlepoint, and I just dove right in. Per usual, I didn't see any point in making anything that I didn't want to make, and I really liked this pattern. I thought it was very painterly, like many of Kaffe's patterns are, and so I picked this up and got back to work on it. Okay, it's almost the end of January, and I figured I would give you a little update on where things are at this point. So the cross stitch, I am happy to say, is totally done. I have decided not to do that border around the outside because, as you can see, I don't have a lot of room on the edges, and that's totally fine. The finishing touch was putting a couple of French knots in these trees, which I think turned out pretty cute. Here is the status of the needlepoint. I am almost done with all of the actual motifs here. I just have to finish filling in this shell at the bottom, this yellow. The rest of the interior of that shell is going to be that bright yellow. And then I have to do the background of this whole thing. It's a little bit hard to see on the chart, but around the outside of all of these floral motifs is sort of a lighter orange. And then the entire background will be filled in with yellow again. So I'm getting close to done, although I have zero idea how long doing this background is going to take. The task that I'm planning to tackle this morning is finishing this open out box pouch. And once I found my instructions here, I realized exactly why I stopped. And that's because I'm at the sort of fiddly part of putting this whole thing together, which is installing the zipper. The instructions have you sandwich it between the lining and the outside and sew through all 3 layers at once, so the lining and the outside of the bag and the zipper tape. And I think what has worked best for me in the past is actually attaching the zipper to the lining first and like basting it in, because you have to get it around this curve in a way that the end of the zipper, this bit here, ends up in the right spot to actually open the bag. So that I remember being a little bit fiddly in the past. So yes, I'm going to baste the zipper in. And then once the zipper is put in, it's actually a pretty quick sew to get it finished. So I might actually be able to finish this today. Here you can see what the finished bag looks like. Once the zipper is in, it's really quite easy to finish this and goes quickly after that. So very glad to have this new project bag. We're getting close to month end here, so I wanted to show you where I ended up with the needlepoint. You can see I got a lot of work done on this, and I've started on these little orange sections for the background. So this is the current status as of the end of January. The other project that's been going on in the background is my mitered square blanket. I made it to 18 by 19 squares, which is just over 50%. So I still have a long ways to go if I am going to make it to my 22 by 28 dimensions that I am currently planning on. Alrighty, I just finished all of the orange little detail around these flowers, and now I'm about to start on the background. When I went to the needlepoint shop to buy this yarn, most of it came in lengths like this. This is what's known as Persian wool, which is sort of 3 plies just very loosely plied together, and you can peel off however many you need. So I'm using 2 plies together for this project. And for the background color, I have this giant skein. So this is the only skein that I bought because I needed so much of it. And so I noticed that these lengths, which are all just individual lengths ready to be threaded on the needle, are exactly the skein cut at one end and at the other end. So this feels very blasphemous to me, but I'm gonna go ahead and cut the skein apart instead of winding it into a cake and then like peeling off of the cake. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm never gonna try to knit with this stuff, so I'm not worried about preserving the length of it. So this feels weird, but let's go ahead and cut this skein up. Well, that was fun. So now that I have this cut, I am going to go ahead and start filling in the background. As I'm trying to get through all of these projects, one of the things that I've been doing this year is setting very achievable goals, both on a monthly and on a weekly basis. So for example, in January, my main goal was to finish the cross stitch project and the open out box pouch, which I did. And I've decided that my goal for February is to finish the needlepoint and also the Northern Augustins sweater, which I have been putting off working on. So what I do to break these sort of monthly goals down into weekly and daily is I decide at the beginning of the week, or really on the weekend before. For me, in my mind, the week starts on Monday. So the weekend before, I will decide what I want to get accomplished in that next week. And I choose something that's very, very easy to accomplish. I don't do anything that's going to be a stretch for me with my work schedule right now. That wouldn't work mentally. So I'm choosing something that's very easy to accomplish. So for example, this week I had decided that I wanted to get all of the orange done on my needlepoint so that I could move on to doing the yellow background, and I was able to accomplish that on Thursday or Friday maybe. So now I have the whole weekend to, get a nice head start on the background color. For the Northern Augustins sweater, I just started working on that on February 1st, and since I have not been looking forward to working on it, what I've been doing is just on a day-to-day basis, I just make myself work on it a little bit. My only rule for myself is that I have to get it out and I have to work on it. If I feel like I'm having a hard time getting started, I have one of those little timers that you can just set for 20 or 30 minutes, and I'll just do 20 or 30 minutes, and at the end of it, if I want to stop, I let myself stop for the day, no problem. So just that has resulted in the sleeve almost being done. So let me show you the first sleeve. We'll do a little try on here. So here is how this is looking. You can see I still have to do the rib on the bottom, but the length is actually, I think, okay. I might just be able to start the rib and have that be a nice length. For the sleeve, I think I need maybe 2 to 3 more repeats of the flea pattern. I want to get the sleeve to the wrist length before I put the rib on, because then the sleeve will be able to blouse over the ribbing just a little bit. I just don't want these sleeves to be too short. There were a couple comments on the last video about how sort of cone-shaped this yoke looked when it's not on the body, and yes, the shaping for this yoke is very even throughout the yoke, so it is cone-shaped when it's not on me. I think because I'm wearing it with a good amount of ease and the fabric is stretchy enough, it is going over my shoulders fine, but if I were wearing this with less ease, that would certainly be a problem. And I've gotten to this point, I think the sleeve was about here. So I've done this amount in 3 days. It's really not bad. 3 days of working on it for half an hour a day. I can't really get mad about that. So I have already done my 30 minutes for today. I don't know if I'm gonna do any more because I am still not enjoying working on it. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's definitely that large gauge. I just don't like knitting with such large needles. Now I know for the future. It won't stop me if I really want the finished thing. And I can actually tell that this is going to be a really great addition to my wardrobe. It is super warm and I really like that. And it's actually quite soft. This yarn is soft against the skin. I've got a t-shirt on under this sleeve and it's not irritating at all. So that is also good to know. So here's where I am with my needlepoint project. You can see I have started the background. I've gotten a little ways. This is about 2 days of work, maybe about 2 hours. It is quite boring, but also pretty satisfying to see as it gets filled in, like what it's really going to look like when it's done. I did add 5 extra stitches on this side and 5 on the top, so I'm going to do the same on the bottom just so that there's a little bit of yellow space because I am planning to put a mat on top of this, and I didn't want, so the original pattern ends quite close to the edge of this bow, and I didn't want to sort of have that trip me up when I am trying to frame it and mat it at the end. So that's where I am, and I'm probably going to do a little bit more work on this today. I'm tempted to make my goal for next week finishing this, but I'm not sure if that's going to be too much of a stretch. So I think I'll see how much of this background I can get done this weekend and then decide that on Sunday. Check it out. I have gotten a second wind on this thing. First wind, maybe? After I finished this sleeve, I started right away on the second one, and it's going significantly faster than the other one, which is nice. I've stopped for the moment because I am holding this main yarn double, and my other skein has run out, so I need to divide this in two. This is all that I have left for the entire remainder of the sweater. I think it should be enough. I'd really like to make the body a little bit longer, like do a couple more repeats of the fleas, I have decided. And I feel like this is more than it looks like. It's more yardage than it looks, but we'll see how much I have left after I'm done with this sleeve, which I'm hoping to get done today. So now that the needlepoint is done, the next thing I'm going to try to tackle is my pair of Alabama Chanin Palazzo pants. This is panel number 1 of 4, and this isn't even halfway done, so this is the starting point. Hello, it's February 21st, and I'm here to do a little check-in on some of my projects. This is finally done. You can maybe tell I did cut it quite close. This is the only yarn I had left, which I was holding double. I made the body maybe this much longer. I think it was somewhere around here, so I did get a couple more flea repeats in. Did some 1x1 rib here. Did the sleeves as written as far as decreasing for this cuff. You do basically just rapid decreases right at the end and knit your 1x1 rib on the cuff. The pattern indicates to do a tubular bind off. There is zero way that would have happened with this yarn. There's no way I could have like sewn, done any sort of Kitchener type sewing with this stuff. So I just did a regular bind off in the 1x1 rib. So let's do a quick try on of this so I can see where I might need to focus a little bit while I'm blocking. Okay, so here is how this is fitting. I have this on over a long sleeve cotton t-shirt, and you can see this is lower. It feels very long on me. I know this is like normal sweater length for most people, but I crop everything so often that this feels a little long, but it's going to be a cozy house sweater, so I think that is fine. I like the neck. I think the neck is fine. It's not bothering me against my neck, so that is nice. And the sleeve length I think is fine. It would also be fine if it was slightly longer. So not too many issues when it comes to blocking this. So as far as the depth of this yoke, you can see my armpit is right here. So it is quite a deep yoke. There's maybe 2 inches of additional space there. If I was going to be trying to put this on and off over a coat or something like that all day, and that would maybe be annoying, what I would have done was stop the color work here and split for the sleeves earlier, and then just continued the color work like separately in the round on the sleeves and body. That is a very easy solution if you have a yoke depth that's a little bit long. But for a cozy around the house sweater, I actually prefer sort of a little bit of a deeper yoke. Not anything more extreme than this though. Like once it gets to be a little bit more, once you get further down than this, a deeper yoke than this even, then you start to have the sweater raise up way too much when you're trying to raise your arms and stuff like that. So there's a sweet spot for like a deep cozy yoke, and I think this is at about the limit for my preference. So there you go, let's block it. And here is the blocked result. You can see the sleeves grew a little bit and are definitely sort of blousing over the cuff, which is not terrible. I'll be able to pull the sleeves down over my hands when it's really cold in the house, and that's going to be really nice for next winter. For an oversized cozy sweater, I think this really fits the bill for my needs. And one of the things that I really like about this is the yarn combination. I like how the mohair in the yoke provides this little bit of added fuzz, and it's very soft and comfortable. The other thing I want to show you while I have the camera out is where I am with the Alabama Chanin project. This is going much faster than it originally did. I guess back when I started this in 2019 or maybe even earlier, my needle skills were just not as good as they are now. And so I thought that this was going to take me forever to finish this, but I actually finished the piece that I showed you maybe 2 days ago and have completely done the quilting on another piece. So I only have 2 pieces to go. So it's sort of in a good stage for me to show you the actual process of making a garment like this. So let me show you from the beginning. So the way these garments usually start is you have 2 layers of knit fabric. So you can see I've got some blue fabric with this leaf pattern airbrushed on it, and I've got some black fabric. So here I have an assembly for one of the front legs. So you can see I've got this black on the bottom and I've got the blue on the top. I previously airbrushed this fabric, which I think is honestly the hardest part of this whole process if you are trying to like replicate this on your own. Other than that, doing one of these projects is actually quite simple. It's very time consuming, but simple. So at the beginning of the project, you have to decide what type of stitching you're going to be doing and which part of the fabric you're going to be cutting away. So I knew that I wanted my garment to be mainly black, but have a little bit of color on top. And so it's a little bit distracting when you're working on it because it feels like you're making a blue garment with silver leaves all over it. But then when you cut away the majority of the blue fabric, which is what I'm doing, you really end up seeing most of the black. So what you do is cut out 2 identical pattern pieces in each fabric, and then you put them together with the right sides of both of them facing up. So that feels a little not intuitive if you are sewing and you're used to sewing things with like right sides together. You want to put the right side of your fabric that's going on the bottom against the wrong side of your top fabric. And then you quilt around all of these little motifs, and then you cut your fabric away however you want. Another option that I could have done was to quilt around the outside of all of these motifs in the same way and then just cut out the inside of the leaf. In that instance, you would of course see the majority of the blue fabric, but you would see black come through in the middle of the leaf. So that's just another one of the many, many things I could have chosen to do here. So similar to regular quilting, when I have these things all laid out and smooth and, you know, as close to lined up as they're going to get, I will pin them together with just some safety pins so that they don't move around, and then I can get my quilting done. I find lining these pieces up and making sure that there are no wrinkles is sort of the most tedious part of this whole thing, which doesn't seem like it should be, but that's the part I don't like anyway. Now here is the piece I just finished quilting. I'm so pleased I started with the back pieces. They're much bigger than the front, so the front should go even quicker, which is really nice. On this piece, I have finished the quilting already. So here is what this looks like before the fabric has been cut away. You can see I am just quilting around the outside of each motif. I like to leave my knots on the right side. I think that that's a cute look. It provides additional texture in the fabric, which I really like. And so I leave some long tails, and I like to leave my knots on the outside. I do this when I'm quilting also, like hand quilting on a quilt. I really like seeing the tails. It feels personal, you know, when you can see the tails. I also like tying a big double overhand knot. So you can see I've mainly been organizing my knots and my tails at the base of the leaves or maybe at the beginning of the stem. I like the way that looks, but if I have a thread end in the middle of a leaf, I'm not getting fussy about it. I will still tie that on the right side. As far as the thread, if you buy a kit from Alabama Chanin, it will come with basically a rebranded version of this, which is button and craft thread. You can buy this at any big box store. They usually have limited colors and there's not very much on the spool. So because I didn't know how much I was going to need for this project and I didn't want to buy like a bazillion plastic spools, I am using this Gutermann Mara 30, which is a quite thick thread. I'm using black. So let me show you a comparison. So the thread I'm using is on the bottom and the button and craft thread is on the top. They are very similar in terms of thickness. I would say the button and craft thread is a little bit more, it almost feels like it's coated in something. And the thread I'm using is a little bit more malleable. I'm not sure if that's making it easier or harder to work on this. I actually think it might be easier to use the button and craft thread, but I'm used to this stuff now, so I think it is fine. In the time since I've started this project, I learned that you can actually order this button and craft thread in many, many other colors if you're going through like a bigger sewing supply website. So that is what I will do in the future. But for this project, I'm just continuing on as I started. So once all of that quilting is done, then I start cutting away the fabric around the motifs. And you can see, because I stitch just right around that silver fabric paint, I am leaving just a little bit of the blue. I'm eyeballing it. It's maybe between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch as I'm cutting, but I'm not being precious about that at all either. I'm just eyeballing it as I go and sort of peeling the fabric away as I'm cutting. I'm using these little embroidery scissors, which are quite sharp, and I'm having to be very careful to make sure that I don't cut the bottom fabric as I am cutting around these motifs. So I usually have my non-dominant hand underneath the fabric, just making sure that these little, the beak of these scissors isn't poking through. It probably wouldn't hurt me to use a little bit more dull pair of scissors to do this, but I haven't had a mishap yet, so fingers crossed. And that is the way this goes. So it takes longer than you would think to cut around all of these little motifs, but you get into sort of a rhythm with it. And then here is what the final fabric looks like. If I get in close, you can see that I've had my cat on my lap while working on this, but I'll deal with the cat hair at the end. I love how the little knots are still present. You can still see that little bit of additional texture and just a little bit of color from the blue fabric, but otherwise it's really mostly black and silver. I just think that's very cool. I'm really happy with how it's turning out. You can see over here I maybe had some partial motifs that I didn't quilt because the fabric had shifted a little bit and I didn't want to fudge too much when I'm seaming this together with like partial motifs. The second piece I did, I'm still going to have to fudge when I seam this together, but we'll talk about that when I get there and figure it out. And that's the current status. It's really been working for me to have a hand stitching project going on at the same time as a knitting project. And so I think what I'm going to try to do for the rest of February is to finish the quilting on these 2 remaining pieces and see if I can get that done in the next, I think I have a little bit over a week. So that should be doable, especially since the front pieces are a little bit smaller. For a knitting project during that time, I think I will probably keep working on the mitered square blanket and just see what I can get done on that. If I have a little bit more brain space, I might pull something else out. In addition to doing all of the hand quilting and sort of hand detail work on the fabric itself, you also sew all of the construction seams by hand and flat fell them by hand. So here you can see I'm pinning together the crotch curve and I'm about to sew this by hand. Here you can see that finished flat felled seam. And I really like this touch. It's sort of nice to construct by hand after you've done all of the work making this fabric yourself. And finally, blanket progress for the month of February. I'm at 21 by 20 squares, which is getting close to 70% done. Okay, it is March 3rd, and I have finished sewing all of the seams on these pants. I sewed them all, top stitched them all, I inserted side seam pockets just in some plain black. I think it was actually a bamboo knit that I had. There was no way I was going to be able to find whatever this original jersey was that I used for this. And it is time to attach the waistband, which is the final step. Alabama Chanin patterns typically have you finish the waistband with a fold-over elastic. So I have this 1-inch black fold-over elastic, and the instructions just say bind the waistband edge with the elastic using a stretch stitch. But I would like the waist to be a little bit smaller. I think it's going to sit a little bit lower than I like if I just bind the edge as is. So I'm going to cut my elastic 10 to 15% shorter than the circumference of this waistband, and then I'll pin it out in the 4 corners, so at each side seam and then at the front and back seam, so that it's evenly distributed, and then I will sew it down with a stretch stitch. So that is the last step, and these will be done. Okay, so I have the waistband basted on here. I just basted it on with my sewing machine, and I'm not totally sold on how secure this is going to be with the weight of this giant garment hanging off of just like a little teeny tiny fold over elastic. It looks okay, but I think I would actually rather have a thicker waistband here. So I have a couple of options. I could either try to find a black fabric that will match this and do a covered waistband, or I can just use like a 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inch waistband elastic and just have an exposed elastic waist. I would just like it to be a little higher than this. And I can tell, like, as soon as I put anything in a pocket of this, it's going to be dragging the waistband down. I think this waistband would probably be fine. Like the fold over elastic would be fine if the garment wasn't so heavy, you know, for like a shorter skirt or a knee-length skirt or something, or also something tighter fitting that doesn't really rely on this waistband to hold it up. I think that would be okay, but I'm skeptical of it, and I want this to be something that I wear a lot, so I think I'm gonna go ahead with that thick waistband elastic. And here is the finished result. I ended up using 1.5 inch soft waistband elastic, and I sewed it on with a wide zigzag on my machine. I felt a little bit bad for not hand sewing it, but honestly at this point I needed them to be done and so that I could wear them. And I'm very happy with them. It should be noted that Alabama Chanin's patterns are not size inclusive, but there is absolutely nothing stopping you from using the techniques that they outline in their books and using these, you know, the fabric sewing techniques, the hand sewing, the embellishing, all of that on a pattern that you already own that is size inclusive. So their books give, you know, a nice outline of how to do these techniques, and then you can take them and use your imagination and apply them elsewhere so that you're not restricted by just using the patterns that they have on offer. One of the nice things about using this jersey fabric is that there is no hemming to be done at the end. So of course you're free to hem if you like, but it's sort of part of the look to leave it unhemmed and let the hems roll just a little bit. So there we go. Hello, so it is March 4th, the next day. Now that I have finished these Alabama Chanin pants, I am going to move on to this. This is my version of the Red Palm sweater from the Bohus inspired book Poems of Color. And so as you can see, I have the yoke. I have not joined for the underarm yet. I've got some stitches here for the sleeve on a needle. And my original plan was I have knit this yoke by hand, and now I'm going to knit the body on the machine in this light natural Jamieson and Smith color. I was having some trouble visualizing what was going to happen at the underarm if I was doing it on the machine, and I found a video that does a good job, I think, of showing like what that shape looks like of the underarm on both the sleeve and the body. I'm not fully confident in my ability to do it on the machine yet without a whole lot of screwing around, and so because I'm going to try to finish this for my sister's birthday, which is at the beginning of April, so I need to finish it, block it, and send it off to her. I don't have a ton of time to like fiddle, and I don't want to get like too close to the deadline for this. So I think what I'm going to do is actually put all of this back on the needle again and hand knit until I get maybe like half an inch below the sleeve and the body separation. And that way, because the sleeves are going to be short, because my sister lives in a hot climate. So this is just going to be like a cover up in the winter, like to wear over a shirt or something. So I'm going to do short sleeves, like elbow length, and I will knit those by hand anyway. And then once the sleeves and body are separated and I have a little bit of the body done, then I can take just the body and just knit the body flat on the machine. And I'm confident in my ability to do that with my current skill set. So I'm gonna go put this back on the needle. Here's a little shot of my setup. So I've got my machine clamped to this table that I usually use as my cutting table. And here you can see that I have knitted a little bit on the sleeve and gotten the body to a point where it is ready to be put on the machine. Here is my machine swatch that I knitted to try to get as close to my hand knitted gauge as possible. This is close-ish. You know, machine knitting is always going to look a little bit different, but that's sort of the name of the game. And here I'm hanging 1/2 of the body on the machine. You'll see that I'm using little claw weights as I go along. Turns out I needed to do a little bit better job of that, foreshadowing, but this is what the process is like getting the sweater onto the machine. You guys, it's working. I can't believe it's working. You can really see. I really hope to God this blocks out, but it's working. I've knit 10 rows in like, I don't know, 1 minute. Amazing. All right, let's keep going. I got way too excited too soon, and as you can see, I'm 40 some rows in, and I have a little cluster happening at either end of this work. Turns out I needed to be moving those claw weights up a little bit earlier, and I think the garment was just losing tension on the edges. That's why this was happening. Okay. So even with screwing around with fixing those drop stitches on the ends, which was not that problematic, I have made it 104 rows. Did this in about, I don't know, half an hour, even with fixing that mistake. So that's pretty exciting. I think the issue is, so these are weights. These are claw weights that are actually going into the fabric. And I think I just didn't have this. You have to move them up, obviously, as the fabric grows, and I think I just hadn't moved it soon enough, and the stitches on both edges lost tension, and that's why they sort of flipped themselves off the machine. So now I have to figure out, I guess I'm going to join some waste yarn here and do a couple rows in waste yarn, and then that'll make it easy for me to put this back on the needles, and we'll take a look then. All right, here we are. So this is just the back. I just took it off the machine and I just wanted to bring it here to the table so we can actually see what's going on. The division between my hand knitting and the machine knitting is stark. Here it is. There's a lot of volume here. I think this is from the short rows. We are looking at the back. There are short rows below the yoke. So that, I think, will block out. I mean, good Lord, I hope it does. And you can see, so this is the line right here between my hand knitting and the machine knitting, and you can see that the stitch gauge is actually quite close, but just the tension of the machine knitting is significantly, I mean, it's more even, and it just looks different. You know, the actual stitch gauge is the same. But it's interesting. I'm not sure that I like the look of machine knitting. But I'm very interested to see what this looks like when it blocks out. And you can see that I've got a couple rows of gray waste yarn in here. So it's curling a lot more than hand knitting would. The row gauge I think is probably a little bit more dense than hand knitted row gauge. So there we go. I hope this works out. Let's do the front. Okay, I've got the front and the back. This delineation between hand knitting and machine knitting on the front is a lot more subtle for some reason than on the back. I have no idea why that is. So there's the front. And there's the back. Ugh, that just doesn't, it doesn't look great. So I'm torn now at this point whether I want to block this now before I sew the side seams and do the ribbing. I'm going to do the ribbing in the round by hand, and I still have to finish the sleeves. She said she wants them elbow length, so there's some significant way to go. I just sort of, I want to block this now to just make sure it's gonna work out, like with this difference going on here, before I do any more handwork on this. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Okay. Okay, so here we are the next day. As you can see, this line between where the hand knitting ends and the machine knitting starts pretty much blocked out on the front, which is amazing. The back is still a little iffy. So here's the back. It's much better than it was, but you can still sort of see this line here. And so what I'm gonna do, I think, you know, I have to block this one more time after I'm done with the sleeves and the ribbing at the bottom. And so that will, I imagine, get rid of some of this. And then I can also go in here in this first line of machine stitching and just sort of like fiddle the stitches a little bit so that it will blend that transition a little bit better. So now we're looking at the front again, and one thing I had to do yesterday when I was machine knitting was I ran out of yarn. So I have multiple dye lots of this Jamieson & Smith 2006 colorway. It's my favorite, one of my favorite natural colors to use. And so I have multiple dye lots of it, and I only had 3 balls of the original dye lot that I used for the vast majority of this. And so I had run out when I was machine knitting the front with about 9 or 10 rows to go. And so I just visually tried to match with the closest skein of another dye lot that I had, and it looked great in the other room. They looked so close. And when I'm looking at them here, they really don't match at all. You can see it's quite a lot darker than the body of the sweater. So that's not good, and I'm not gonna do my sister dirty like that, leaving a big, big line right across the front of the sweater. So luckily this has blocked out a little bit longer than she said she wanted. So I am just going to rip back 9 rows on the front and on the back. And I'll use this new color for doing the ribbing. And I think that this line will be a lot less obvious if there is also like a stitch pattern change. I'm not worried about that difference there. I just don't want it to be like a hard line in the stockinette part of the sweater. For doing the sleeves, my plan is, so I have some small balls of this original color that I have from unraveling swatches and things like that. So I am going to use whatever scraps I have in this original color, and I will helical knit to blend the transition to this new ball of color in order to finish both sleeves. The other thing I did when I split the front and back for the machine knitting was to cast on an additional stitch at the front and at the beginning and end of each row on the front and back. And so that gives me an additional stitch to use for the mattress stitching when I seam the sides. So I think this should be done relatively soon. It's so interesting how in the bright light it really looks like sort of a close match. And then as soon as you get into a little bit of a shadow, it's like, ugh. Well, I should have known that wouldn't work. So it's the end of March, and as you can see, this one is all done. I'm about to pack it up to send off to my sister for her birthday. So we're looking at the front, and as you can see, after a final blocking, I really can't see any kind of line here from where I started the machine knitting. You really can't tell, I don't think, that I switched dye lots right at the ribbing. I think that was a pretty successful thing. You can tell, I mean, I'm sure you can maybe tell because I'm pointing it out that it's a different dye lot, but I think if you didn't know that, you might not really realize it just seeing the sweater. And it's actually even more pronounced on camera than it is in person. It's really a very subtle transition. For the sleeves, I had enough of the original body color to get to about here, like a couple inches, and then I started fading in the new dye lot, which you can, I'm sure, see because I'm pointing it out here. I faded it in gradually, like one row of the new dye lot, 2 rows of the old color for a couple rounds of that repeating pattern, and then I did some helical knitting, and then by the cuff I was entirely in the new dye lot so that the cuff and the hem are the same. So I think that was pretty successful. Let me show you the back as well. Here's the back. It's been on the sweater dryer, which is why there's just a little bit of wrinkling here, but and then again, I think this blocked out really nicely. You really, I mean, here's the line, and I think that that's one of those things that will just, it will go away with a little bit of wear on the sweater. I'm not worried about that at all, and it's really, I think, only obvious because I'm pointing it out to you here. So for the sleeves, I did about 6 inches, maybe 6.5 inches in total length, and that should be perfect on my sister. She's got a little bit longer arms than I do. On me, these go sort of mid-elbow, maybe just below the elbow. On her, I think it'll be just above the elbow, so that should be perfect. And this is all I had left of that first main color I used, so I'm going to send this along in case she needs it for repairs in the future. And just one final blanket check-in for the month of March. I have made it just past 22 by 22 squares, so I'm closing in on 80%, and this is actually getting there. This will be going on for some time still. That was quite a long one, so if you're still here, thank you very much for watching until the end. I think that's all that I have for you today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.